propaganda in schools today, or rather, schools as machineries of propaganda. Let us consider an anecdote, a recent anecdote, and a passage from a book by Leo Strauss, Persecution and the Art of Writing, published in 1952. Chapter 2 begins thus. In a considerable number of countries which, for about 100 years, have enjoyed a practically complete freedom of public discussion, that freedom is now suppressed and replaced by a compulsion to coordinate speech with such views as the government believes to be expedient, or holds in all seriousness. It may be worth our while to consider briefly the effect of that compulsion or persecution on thoughts as well as actions. To compel someone is to persecute. Let us return to Strauss. A large section of the people, probably the great majority of the younger generation, accepts the government-sponsored views as true, if not at once, at least after a time. And here Strauss goes on to say that, well, how do you do that? How does the government manage to have the people at large conform to its dictates, the system of rules and regulations? Does it do that by mere compulsion? No, that's not enough. First, it has to silence contradiction. Everybody has to agree as to a common basis or core set of, shall we say, values or views, opinions, right? How do you do that? Well, first of all, conflicting parties, in American parlance today, you would say conservatives and progressives, or Republicans and Democrats, they will all agree as to the platform they stand upon. That platform turns out to be, well, the one offered by technocracy, but we'll return to this. The point that Strauss is stressing is that once everybody's agreeing on this this platform of shared views, what happens essentially is that you have silenced contradiction. Does this mean that everybody's convinced, right, that these views that the government sponsors are true? No, not at once, but here's the catch. Habituation is key. Where the same lies are repeated over and over and over again, and where the people who have large hats, the people of authority, repeat those lies, what happens is that we grow up assuming that those lies are true. In other words, that they're not lies. Why? Because the authorities say so. They're experts, they have doctorates, they have English degrees, they have whatever degree you want, and then everybody's repeating the same thing. So it must be true, right? And Strauss here speaks of the logica equina, referring to Gulliver's travels, and so the logic of a horse, who says, well, there is no such thing as a lie. That must be a conspiracy theorist. They are saying that there is a lie that everybody's agreeing upon. If everybody agrees upon it, surely it cannot be a lie. And why question it after all if we all agree? After all, isn't agreement what we all live for? Isn't it the most important thing for us to all agree upon a certain set of values? If we all share the values, the same values, there will be peace. But what if they're lies? They can't be lies. Surely they're not, because our professors told us so. Is that right? So, after a while, Strauss says, this implies that in the countries concerned, all those whose thinking does not follow the rules of logica equina, the logic of the horse, who says, well, if it's there, it must be real. If it's, there is no question about it. In other words, all those capable of truly independent thinking cannot be brought to accept the government-sponsored views. Persecution, then, cannot prevent independent thinking. It cannot prevent even the expression of independent thought. And then, of course, well, Strauss goes on speaking of ways in which independent thinkers, shall we say, were able to communicate their questions, their thinking, right, in books without being detected by the authorities, but without, well, escaping persecution in effect. Now, here is an anecdote that is representative of what is happening in schools today. There is a 4th grade elementary school boy who is receiving an assignment. The teacher says, let us all have, we all choose, everyone chooses a certain character whose life has been recorded somehow in a biography. Fine, we have a biography about, obviously, the story of somebody's life. And you're going to talk about this person's life based on the biography that you will have read. That's great. So the boy comes home to the father, and he says, well, Dad, here's the story. Here's the assignment. Oh, that's great. So, whom will you pick? It's probably a good idea to pick somebody good, right? Not a scoundrel. So, what's one of the most important figures of our civilization? How about Jesus? Well, that's probably a bit provocative for the institution, which of course is controlled by the general regime, the structure, the technocracy. It responds to the demands and expectations of technocracy. So it fulfills the mandate of the technological imperative. So, nevertheless, let us try this. How about it? And the boy tells the father that he is concerned that, no, that won't work because Jesus is from a long time ago and the biographies are not reliable because they're not scientific. They don't have the right facts. Is that what they taught you in school? What are these facts? Let us get this straight. We have scientific biographies today, and we don't have scientific biographies in the past. What's happened? What has changed? Well, what has changed, of course, is that now the facts are integrated in machines and a machine mindset, so that these biographies are perfectly at home in technocracy, whereas old biographies are not at home in technocracy. Oops, what are we going to do about that? Nevertheless, the assignment did not mention these factors, these parameters, did not limit you to consider a modern person. So let us try, and let us try for Jesus. Go for Jesus. We'll pick up one of the Gospels as a biography. What is the Gospel? The Gospels are they are biographies, essentially, of the character known as Jesus. Fine. Still concerns. I don't know. The teacher won't accept this. Why don't you write to her? Okay, so the father writes to the teacher. So is it, Leon has, he's sympathetic, right, to the idea of writing about or presenting the story, the life of Jesus. Does his biography need to be in the school library in order for it to count? No response. Instead of the teacher responding to the parent, you have the teacher going to the assistant principal of the school. The assistant principal, following morning, calling the father and asking, well, not even asking, really, telling him that the boy has come to choose his person, the person of choice, right? The person whose biography he is supposed to, present in class. And that person turns out to be President Grant. Oh, Grant, certainly a modern. At which the father asks, well, is it not possible for him to choose a pre-modern person? Oh, but he's chosen all alone. Well, that's not the case, the father retorts. He was concerned. He obviously chose there out of compulsion. What happens is that he was afraid of not being accepted by the institution, by the class, being out of sync. He had to uniform because he was obviously pressured into assuming even that really all that counts is modern. Anything that is pre-modern, no, that's no good. It's not scientific. We live in the age of science. So, of course, what that really means is that we are all integrating into technocracy, responding to the technological imperative, whereas pre-modern man doesn't. It just doesn't fit. You have a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't work. And so he just assumed that, don't bother. They're not going to like that. They're not going to want it. But the assignment does not mention that it has to be a modern person. So I said, what's wrong with that? As a matter of fact, the father says, the assistant principal says, well, he had originally chosen, mentioned another person. Another person? Another person was Jesus. She didn't want to mention that. So, the father retorts that, look, this is the situation. But no, the assistant principal insists, he chose on his own, freely. There is no such thing. There is no such thing. A child in 4th grade does not choose freely without conditioning. So he's been conditioned. Not a single student will have picked a pre-modern person, a character, a man, a woman from pre-modern times. And the reason is simple. The assistant principal was in absolute denial. But we love their boy. We love him. We love him. Really. Thank you very much. That's very, very good to hear. But the problem here is that school gets worse and worse as the students move on. They're fed into computers. Very often the science assignments are produced by the computer company that produces the computers on which the students see the assignment. So it's all set up, it's all framed technocratically. The subject matters, well, they're just there as a facade for the technological imperative, which is the bottom line of every single class, every single subject matter, every single lesson. Technocracy, well, technology as a way of life shall set you free. We live in a scientific world of hard facts, and these cannot be disputed as long as everybody repeats them as true, as long as the institutions, with their own experts, vouch for them. And yet, this whole machine functions within a universe which it deems obscure, devoid of meaning, of God, a world, a universe that is meaningless. The only meaning, the only salvation that we have at our disposal is the one offered by the machine. So, in this context, Leo Strauss was perfectly right, of course. In this context, what we have is persecution of anyone who disagrees or who questions the dominant imperative. Persecution, in its mildest form, is ostracizing. You're left behind. You're left out. Perhaps you get a bad grade. You're simply flushed out of the system. So, children understand quite quickly, you better conform, or else. But this or else, of course, is covered up by the institution and its bureaucrats, its pawns, who are supposed to be educators. In reality, they're simply bureaucrats. What are they there for? To pretend, to tell parents that they love their children, right? We love you, and we are taking good care of you. And of course, if you have any questions, any further questions, never hesitate to call us again, as if they were customer service. That is just pulling your leg, right? Pretending to care. Of course, everybody's afraid of losing his job. Then the appeal goes to, well, the district, right? It's not our choice, sir. It's the district. Really, but you're complying. You're complying, and the victim is the child. So what you have is the eradication of anything that is pre-modern from schools. And you have this in many different ways. Libraries don't carry old books. They're flushing them out. They don't cover old material. If they do cover something, it's simply barely, and what is more, as a shadow of the modern. So everything is a prelude to us. We live in the narcissistic age in which we posit ourselves as the supreme end of all things. Pathetic, grotesque, abominable. This is transhumanism. We are going beyond our humanity because we define ourselves. Right? There's nothing else that can define us other than our will. And so we have this rehearsal of the 1930s Nazi proclamation of the triumph of the will. Right? So here we have it. In our neo-Nazi regime, the triumph of the will is the triumph of the social atom who is integrated to reflect a technological imperative. He is free only insofar as he conforms to that imperative. Do not question it. Amen.